Hello, I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, it is so lovely to be back with you today. Today, it's just you and me. I'm not going to be interviewing someone today. I'm going to be sharing another tool for your anxiety toolkit. And today's tool is, I'm not going to share the name of it with you just yet, but this is the tool that has been the most life-changing for me personally with my own anxiety. And we know from the research that this is one of many tools that makes a powerful difference for people who have anxiety, no matter what age, particularly when worry is one of those symptoms that is a problem and gets in the way. I was a worrier as a kid. My mum, well, anyone who knew me as the worry wart. I worried about so many things, and that's what happens when you have generalized anxiety disorder. You have lots of worries about lots of different things, and that's why it's called generalized. And the way I managed my worry was to seek the reassurance of my mum. And I wonder whether or not if you worry or if you know someone who does worry, whether or not you might be able to start to think about the kind of patterns that are evolving or have evolved around that symptom. When worry comes, is there a reassurance seeking or is there a particular pattern of behaviour? It's important, and this is something that I'll come back to in another episode, but patterns around anxiety are really important to recognise, because once we've recognised patterns, we can do something about changing them. For me, though, born in the 1970s and being a worrier, nobody really having the understanding around anxiety, unlike we do now, it wasn't recognised that I had anxiety. It wasn't recognised that my worries were a part of that. And the way we managed it was the very best way we knew how, which was I'd go to mum and say, I'm really worried about this. And mum would be able to see that my thinking was not rational and that I was catastrophizing and that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. And she'd be able to say, oh, don't worry, it's not a problem, or that won't happen, or you'll be okay. And that reassurance meant the world. It was what settled my little anxious brain, dropped my little anxious shoulders, and enabled me to get on with the day until the next worry would come, in which case I'd turn to mum and ask the same question. Mum, I'm worried about this. What do you think? And that was the pattern that we fell into. And that pattern continued for a very, very long time. What happens when we're anxious is the brain has detected a threat, and what's necessary when there is a threat is that instant fight or flight. What are we going to do what can we do in that moment to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves safe? Do we flee? Do we fight? Sometimes we freeze. And I wrote about how I was in a threatening situation in Anxious Mums. I wrote about this and I froze. But that fight or flight response, because it wasn't seen through to the end, got stuck. And that's probably a story for another day as well. But when we do feel anxious, we worry because there's a part of our brain that needs to determine, is this a threat? And we can become very laser focused on the threat. And in the same way that we might have an ulcer in our mouth and we just got to keep checking in, or we've got a sore tooth or we've got a bruise and we just want to touch it and poke and prod it just to see, is it still sore? Yes, it's still sore. Our brain, in a similar way, just keeps checking in with that threat. Is that still a problem? And we can expend a lot of time and energy focusing on a worry in an attempt, futile attempt usually, to problem solve and to sort it out. And what it does is we get so lost in these worries, it takes us away from what we could be doing and really enjoying in the moment. It really hooks our thinking and takes our mind away from the present. I spent a lot of time talking to mum and getting reassurance. And really, when Peter and I became very close, and we've been together a long time now, he really was the one that took over as he learned more. I think he got more than he bargained for, because my mental health was declining in a few years after we met, and he's had to learn a lot. He took over the reassurance, and again, he didn't feel well equipped. None of us, not no one in my family, I didn't, Peter didn't, we didn't understand what was happening. And really, essentially, with me was I couldn't stand the discomfort. I would worry about something, and I didn't have any skills to be able to tolerate the discomfort. And I didn't have any skills to be able to observe my thinking and to be able to recognize that I was worrying. I was so lost in it, I couldn't see what was happening. And because I couldn't stand the discomfort, I was constantly looking for somebody to tell me it was going to be okay. And what that meant was I was not managing my anxious thinking. I was not managing my anxiety, because with those worries comes all the physical symptoms of anxiety. And I was really dependent on other people to see me through the day-to-day experience of anxiety. And it's really hard on me, and it was really hard on them. And what would happen with me was I would spend a lot of time, particularly when I was experiencing health anxiety. And I wonder if you can relate, or if you know of someone who has spent a lot of time seeking that reassurance, whether or not it's within their family or from an external person. And for me, that was also my GP. I would look and need, I would look for and need evidence to dispute how I was thinking. I've had a lot of therapy over time, and my amazing psychologist, gosh, he was a life-changing addition to my life for a long, long time. And he's since retired, but he was really able to get me through many, many years of struggle and decision making, really helped me to learn a lot about my thinking. I've had elements of OCD have really affected my life as well. And OCD is obsessive and compulsive disorder, and that's where we have obsessive thoughts, intrusive thoughts that are sickening to the stomach, thoughts that, sometimes I'd be driving and I'd drive over a tree root that had pushed up the bitumen on the road, and in my mind, I'd run over an animal. I'd killed a dog or a cat, and I would have these intrusive thoughts about this having happened, even though it wasn't rational. And I would drive back to check, have I injured an animal? And then when I couldn't see any evidence that I'd injured anything, I thought, no, it's wounded, it's run off. And I'd be plagued by that sort of thinking for a long time, and I'd continue to seek that reassurance. Whereas some people with obsessive and compulsive disorder have compulsive actions that they take to help reduce the anxiety they feel as a result of their intrusive thoughts. So that's something that has been a challenge for me on and off, not so much now as an adult, especially because I take medication for my anxiety now. As I was learning to develop thinking skills whilst spending a lot of time in therapy, I was learning to look for evidence to dispute the thinking that I was having. I would, for example, when one of the kids had a rash, I would look for evidence against the idea that this was a rash that was going to cause some sort of catastrophic health issue. So I would remember the words of my GP. She would say to me, serious problems have serious symptoms. So I'd remember that. I would check for a fever. I would keep an eye on the rash to ensure that it was one of those pink rashes that sort of disappears when you press on it and comes back when you lift your finger. So it's one of the safe types of childhood rashes. I would ensure that my child was eating and drinking, and sort of trying to tick off all of the check boxes to help myself find evidence to dispute the fact that this was going to be a catastrophic health issue, this rash. And we know how often kids get rashes. I would do that, and sometimes I would be able to settle down my thinking and move on from the idea that this rash was something terminal. But many other times I would try all of that, and I would end up back at the GP having one or other of the kids checked and getting that reassurance again, because I couldn't stand that sickening feeling of discomfort that comes when we're so terribly worried about something. It's really, really hard. What happened with my thinking is what I now know to be fusion. And fusion is it's a word used to explain where things can seem like the absolute truth. So when it comes to our thinking, fusion, when we're fused with a thought, we're hooked, like we've been caught on the end of a fishing line, we're hooked. And this comes from the work of Dr. Russ Harris. And I've shared this in Michael Gross and I wrote about this in Anxious Kids, and I wrote about this at length in Anxious Mums. And when we're fused with a thought, so I'd like you to think about yourself, whether or not you get very worried, or whether or not one of your children or a student in your class perhaps has a lot of worries. When a person is worried about something and it's very distressing, they're in a state of fusion. Thoughts can seem like the absolute truth or like a command or an order that you have to obey and a rule that you have to follow. They can feel like a threat that you need to get rid of as soon as possible, which was really where I was at. I would sense the threat and I'd need to eliminate the threat by eliminating the possibility that, in the example I shared, that the rash was something that was going to evolve into some sort of terminal health situation. And it's something, when we're in a state of fusion, it's something that's happening in the here and now. So even though we're worried, you might be worried about maybe getting the family together at Christmas, given that I'm recording this in November 2021. You might be worried about how everyone's going to get along, or is everybody going to be able to come because of travel restrictions or other circumstances that might be restrictive. That is something that may or may not happen in the future, but because you're fused with that thinking now, it's as if that particular circumstance that's very stressful and anxiety provoking is happening in the here and now. When we're in a state of fusion, it feels like this worry, it's very, very important and it requires all of our attention. And it's something that we just can't let go of, even if it makes our life worse. So that's what fusion means. This is an experience that I have had more times in my life than I could ever even count. But that is no longer my experience. As I learned new thinking skills, and they're the skills that I love to share in my presentations and in the books that I write and in the podcast, of course. This is why I'm doing this. I really want you to have these skills so they can make the difference in your life that they've made in mine as well. So what I'm talking about today, having given you a really good background, is the idea of diffusion, which is a powerful thinking strategy that you can adopt and that you can teach to other people in your life. So the idea of diffusion is simply about, it's putting space between you and what you're thinking. One of the elements that makes diffusion so powerful is the idea that when you diffuse from a thought, you can see a thought for exactly what it is. Nothing more or nothing less than a bunch of words or pictures in our head. If we can start to think about our thoughts in that way, it's a very powerful change. Often, if we think it, we believe it to be true. And thoughts are not always facts. But the thing about diffusion that I love, especially, is it matters not, is a thought true or not? Because yes, there are going to be thoughts we have that are distressing and are true, that we cannot dispute, that we would never find evidence to dispute, no matter how long we tried or how hard we looked. The idea of diffusion is based around the idea that thoughts are, again, I'll say it again, a bunch of words and pictures in our head. And in the same way that we can open a book and read a bunch of words, they can be fiction, they can be non-fiction. It's the same about our thinking. When we can diffuse from a thought, and I'm going to give you some strategies today to learn how to do that. When we diffuse, it's such an incredible relief. When we're diffusing a thought, what we recognize is that a thought may or may not be true, that it's not a command and it's not a rule that we have to follow. There isn't a threat and it's not something happening in the here and now. It's merely, once again, just words or pictures in our head. The thought may or may not be important. When we're in diffusion, the thought may or may not be important. And we have a choice as to how much attention we pay to it. And diffusion allows us to let thoughts come and go without any need for us to hold on to it or to try, as we might, to push it away. Diffusion is, as I said, one of the most powerful thinking strategies that I use and I love to share. So, how do we do it? Well, you'll know in episode 2, I talked about metacognition. I talked about thought noticing. And hopefully between listening to that episode and listening to this episode, you've had a go at practicing or maybe developed a routine where you're practicing noticing what you're thinking, developing that metacognition skill. As adults, we can all do it. In children, this ability evolves through middle and late primary school, the ability to notice a thought. This is the first step, and that's why I did that episode first. So being able to notice that you're thinking, because what happens is, and I love this, I love to use this metaphor. Picture this. Picture that you are being swept away in a river that's moving really, really quickly. You are distressed. You're being swept away from the present moment. You don't have much that feels like it's in your control, and you'd be in a state of panic, and it's a very distressing state to be in. You're just getting swept down this really fast-flowing river. That's a bit like fusion. We're so hooked, nothing else, we can pay attention to nothing else that's happening. We're swept away from the present, and there's no enjoyment in the life that we can lead in the here and now. Imagine now that you manage to pluck yourself out of the river, or you're plucked out of the river, and you can stand on the side and you can watch the river go by. You're safe, you're well, you're warm, you're dry, and you can observe the river flowing in the same way that you can start to observe your thoughts flowing, coming and going, coming and going. There's another thought. Oh, I'm having a thought. So instead of being lost and hooked and fused and swept away by your thinking, you can observe that you are having a thought. And we do this all the time, don't we? We might be listening. Our kids might be coming home from school and sharing with us the events of the day, and then you might drift, your mind might drift to, oh, what time's basketball training tonight? Oh, gosh, am I going to have time to cook dinner? Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry, darling, what were you saying? And we realise that we've drifted, that we've got hooked by a thought. We recognise that that's happened. We unhook and we come back into the present moment. So this is how diffusion works. And there are a number of ways that you can practice this thinking skill. I'm going to share my favourite, and I'm going to share a few ways that you can help teach this to children. What I do when I'm having a worry and I notice I'm worried about something, the very first thing I ask myself is it helpful? When one of our children was very young, we were down on the floor in the family room doing some drawing. And this was many, many years ago. And he was doing what little kids do when they're drawing. It's working hard to create a masterpiece. And at the time, in the family room, I'd bought dozens and dozens of, well, probably a dozen to be realistic, IKEA frames. And the kids' artwork was all framed up and displayed beautifully in this gorgeous kids' art gallery in that room. He said to me, as he was doing his drawing, "I'm a terrible artist." And in that moment, my heart sank, because in that moment, I was flooded with memories of feeling the same way as a kid, and those perfectionistic tendencies that I've worked to get out of the way of my life. In that moment, that kind of feeling of, oh goodness, have I got a perfectionist on my hand? What's that going to mean for him? All those sort of thoughts and memories came back. So I felt in that moment pretty affected by this comment. Many years before this event happened, I probably would have disputed that thought for him and said, that's not true. You're a beautiful artist. Turn around. Look at all this gorgeous artwork that we've got displayed. Look at all these beautiful paintings and drawings that you've done. And I would have looked for evidence to dispute that thinking with him. But by this stage, I knew a different way forward. And so I simply said, is that helpful? And he said, well, no. And so I said, well, I wonder what would be helpful. How about we just get on with practicing? And that was the extent of that conversation, and it never came up again. There was nothing more to it than posing the question, is it helpful? So this is a really great place to start. If a child comes to you and they have a worry about something that is, maybe they've got an older sister or brother who's just done year 12 exams and yet they're in grade 6 and they're saying, oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to do my year 12 exams. It looks so stressful. You could say, is that helpful? Is it helpful to be thinking about that right now? And of course, the answer will be no. And then the next thing that you can say is, well, what would be helpful right now? Let's get back to making dinner, or let's get back to watching our show, or let's get back to walking the dog, or whatever it is that you're doing in that moment. Because a huge part of this podcast and what I want to teach is the idea that you don't have to get rid of anxiety to do what's important. You can be anxious and do it anyway. And we don't always have to feel amazing, like all our ducks in a row, to be able to do the things that matter in our lives. And these thinking skills go a long way to helping you do that. And is it helpful is the first step. For me now, I can ask myself, I can notice if I'm worried, if I'm hooked. I still get hooked, but then I eventually notice and I'm able to say, is that helpful? I don't say it out loud. I just ask myself in my head. I say no, and then I return my focus back to what I was doing. The next part of this, sometimes we need more. And I used to do this often. I don't tend to need to go to this step so often now because I'm so well practiced. What I would do is if I noticed I was if I was fused or hooked, I could say, is that helpful? No. Then I could, if I was still feeling really hooked, I could say to myself, I'm having the thought that this isn't going to happen the way I want it to. Or I notice I'm having the thought that this event is going to be a disaster, depending on what the worry is of the time. So what I'm doing is I'm using a diffusion strategy, DEFUSION, using a diffusion strategy. And what it's doing is it's putting distance between me and my thinking. It's enabling me to step back, get out of the river and observe what's happening. And what it does is it takes the sting out of the worrying, it takes the sting out of the thinking and the power out of it, and it helps create space to do something different, to take action, to do something that matters. It's not about getting rid of the thought. It's not about getting rid of the threat. It's not about being able to solve this issue. It's about recognizing that you're worried, unhooking from that, and turning your focus in the direction of something that's meaningful. So what I've shared already is that you can ask the question, is it helpful? As an adult, the diffusion strategy that worked beautifully for me and continues to when I need it is, once I've noticed I was hooked, saying, I'm having the thought that, because then I'm recognizing I'm having a thought. And what we know about thoughts is that they are words and pictures in our head. Okay? I notice I'm having a thought. I notice I'm having the thought that. And that gives me that space and that opportunity to get out of the river, get unhooked, and then recognize, well, what would be helpful now? All right, you can flip it. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm never going to get everything done today that I need to get done. Is that helpful? No. What would be helpful? Well, set yourself a task, get it done, tick it off, move on to the next. Other strategies that you can use for diffusion are things to try. One of the strategies we use in our home and that I love to share is about naming your mind. In episode 1, Carly Taylor talked about the sage and the gremlin, and how in her family, the sage is of course, the sage in anyone's family is the wise one with the good ideas, the helpful ideas, the productive ideas, and the gremlin is the one that is the one that's sending the worries and causing the trouble. And so, along the same vein, you might like to ask your kids and for yourself as well. Name your mind. My mind is Sam. And so, if I was to use this diffusion strategy, if I have a worry, because right now as I'm recording this, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I need to take our daughter to her basketball game. So if I have the thought come into my mind that I need to be really careful not to be late, or I'm going to be late, then I could say, thanks for that, Sam. Thank my mind. Thanks, Sam. That's not helpful. I've got this. And move on and really concentrate here, of course, on what I'm sharing with you. So naming our minds is another way to get distance. And when we ask our children to do the same, my kids have named their minds. Sometimes we can say, oh, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Charlotte. This is my daughter's mind's name is Charlotte. Thanks for that, Charlotte. Thanks, Charlotte. Appreciate that, but no thanks. And we don't berate the mind. We don't put the mind down. We just go, nah, thanks, but no thanks. I'm recognizing that you're sending me ideas, just having ideas and thoughts, and I know where they're coming from. And again, it creates that distance. Another strategy is about naming the story. I know, having talked to a lot of people, as I always do, in my work and in my personal life, that there's a lot of anxiety around returning back into life, about whether or not to go to an event, about whether or not to catch up with a big group of people, whether or not to make a booking, because of the uncertainty that we've all been living with, and the potential for catching COVID-19. And what can happen is that for some, where anxiety is a problem, there can be this story, this overarching story that I am going to catch COVID and get very sick. And of course, there is a possibility that any one of us will catch it. I know a lot of people who have already. What we can do when we recognize that there's a story on a bit of a loop in our mind, we can thank our mind for the story. We can say, oh, it's that story again. It's the I'm going to catch COVID and get really sick story again, or the I'm never going to lose this extra weight I put on. I'm never going to be able to do the things I used to be able to do. It's that story again. This diffusion strategy helps you to recognize that we do have a lot of the same types of thoughts on repeat. We do loop our thinking, and we think a lot of the same things. And it's that separation. Get out of the river, get onto the bank, watch what's happening. It's that story again. And we can go, is that helpful? No, what would be helpful? All right, well, I'm going to turn my attention back to what I'm doing in the moment. And whether or not it's related to what you were thinking or not, it matters not. It's about doing something in alignment with your values, re-engaging in what's really important in the moment. And so these are some of the diffusion strategies that I wanted to share with you today. Worries can detract from quality of life. For those of us with anxiety, it's a classic symptom. Lots and lots and lots of worries. And some children can have thoughts that are unhelpful, that might seem a bit strange or a bit unusual, and that they can get on a bit of a loop sometimes. And of course, if you're at all concerned, I love to always remind you that if you're at all concerned about your own mental health, or about the mental health of someone in your family or a friend or a student, reach out for help, reach out for support for yourself if you're not sure how to support that person, and help that person find the help that they need. And a really great place is to start with a GP. There is a lot of help around in the way of coaching, people like Carly, counselling, people like Erica Rhodes, who I will soon be releasing an episode with. We've done an interview recently. And other people who are psychologists, of course, like the wonderful Karen Young and Chris McCurry, who I've done interviews with already. So seek help early, because anxiety is treatable, it's manageable, and the sooner the better. I hope that today's episode has really equipped you with skills that may be new. And to recap, today we've talked about a practical strategy that you can apply when it comes to worrying. The idea is to build the capacity through mindfulness practices to be able to notice what you're thinking, to notice when you've become hooked, or teach those that you love and support to notice when they've been hooked, and help them when they share a worry with you or when you notice that you're worried to say, "Oh, I notice I'm having the worry that," or "I notice I'm thinking about this," or "Thank your mind. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for that. But no, thanks. Is that helpful? No, what would be helpful? Right. Would be helpful just to really re-engage in what I'm doing here and now, whether that's related to the worry or completely unrelated, as long as it's something that's meaningful and brings you right back into the present. I shared the strategy around naming that story. And I also love to share one last strategy, which is a voice changing app. Sometimes when kids, especially young kids, have a worry, sometimes you can help them to recognize that they're just words by recording their worry into a voice changing app and playing it back to them like the Chipmunks or Darth Vader, or getting them to say the worry in a silly, funny voice. In the same way that sometimes when we repeat a word, I don't know if you've ever played the milk, milk, milk game, where you say the word milk over and over and over and over and over again as fast as you can, and it loses its meaning. I find that with words every now and again. I'll look at a word and I go, this looks really strange, but it's a word you've known pretty much your whole life. It's just that you've used it a lot or you've seen it a lot. So sometimes the voice changing app or using a different voice can be really another fun way to get that distance between the person and the worry, diffuse from the thinking, and be able to get that space to think about what would be important to do right now. Alrighty, well, that's it from me for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I love that I can jump on here and share these tools with you every now and again. And I very much look forward to hearing what you think. Tell me what you think. Try it out. I'd love your feedback. And I look forward to also very much to seeing you next week for another episode. All right, take care and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.